From the idea to experience. The governmental program acid paper, the official name was large-scale preservation of endangered Polish library and archival collections, was carried out between the years 2000 and 2008. But of course, the funding didn't come from day to day. Actually, the story started already 5 years before that date, and specifically with memorandum of Polish libraries and archives to the Ministry of Culture and Polish government, warning about the catastrophic condition of our 20th century written heritage and problems of acid paper in Polish libraries and mainly state archives. Between 2008 and 2008, we had guaranteed funding for carrying out all 38 different tasks of the program. But between years 2008 and 2012, in the Polish state archives, there were additional funds available to continuation of the program, mainly for the reinforcement of deacidification activities also in the individual conservation laboratories in 16 institutions. But main goals were to set a network of installations, to start the acidification process, to also equip microfilming and a little bit later digitization laboratories. The program actually started in the period when microfilming was still carried out in our archives, but slowly it was already clear that with time we will have to move to the digitization. Important tasks were also to evaluate condition of our holdings and to evaluate existing methods for mass deacidification to see what's possible to be applied in Poland. From the other hand, institutes involved with the cellulose industry could carry out preparations for a legal initiative, reinforcing production of acid-free paper by Polish industry, and also reinforcement of usage of acid-free paper specifically for the scientific publications and also for official use by public authorities. Needless to say, a part of the program was also dealing with education and information about the threat of acid paper, and small part, but still could address also problem of microbiological threats of the 19th and 20th century production papers in our holdings due to the not very good condition of our repositories. Program budget over 8 years was 70 million of Polish zloty. I'm showing this slide not to show you how big the budget was, more to show how small the budget was. Also, I'm giving you two different calculations because you can see according to today's exchange rate, this sum is even smaller. Great majority of funds was allocated for actually deacidification of holdings, much less for scanning, microfilming, research, and other tasks. Of course, from the beginning, it was clear that any decisions would be made must be based on the research and information. The research component of the program was based on the different laboratories, mainly National Conservation Department laboratories, Chemistry Department and Jagiellonian University, Conservation Department of Nicolaus Copernicus in Toruń, Pulp and Paper Institute, and Central Laboratory of Conservation of Archival Records. As you can see, these institutions are differ between each other. Some of them focus on chemical research, some are more related to restoration and conservation science. Needless to say, the National Library was coordinator of the project and coordinator of whole program. Coordination was specifically needed because all funds were coming from 6 different ministries, budgets, Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Education, and some others. Program as it is was not an easy task to carry out, and I have to say, in some years, financing was not flawless. But here I will show you what we managed to accomplish. A core research laboratory of the different research programs was a research laboratory of stability and degradation of paper at the Chemistry Department of Jagiellonian University. Here I have to mention Professor Andrzej Barański, head of this laboratory and one of the initiating persons for a whole governmental program. Interesting that idea of the acid paper program came both from the side of Chemistry Department and researchers working on the problem of paper degradation, as well from the part of the collection managers, National Library and Polish State Archives, specifically the head office of Polish State Archives at that time. Projects carried out by laboratory were mainly analysis of causes and cause of paper degradation, methodology of accelerated aging tests, evaluation of existing technologies for mass paper deacidification, tests of selected mass deacidification technology, and many other research in the field of paper conservation science. Important also was the fact that researchers from the laboratory visited at that time practically almost all mass deacidification centers working in Europe and in the United States in order to see how the system work and carry out preliminary discussions with the technology owners. Based on this research, the first decisions were made. Of course, from the beginning, it was also clear that Poland wants to buy technology. Because of our heritage preservation law, it was impossible, for example, to send our documents and books abroad for deacidification in the existing installations in Europe. Such proposals were coming, of course, but our government preferred and our institutions preferred to have technology in Poland, and also we wanted to buy technology. We wanted to have a possibility to manage the acidification plans. It was related also to the way how our public institutions are being funded. It's exactly this 1 year public finances planning. So we were not able to assure business partners that the orders for the acidification would come over longer period of time. This actually made impossible agreement about investments of private companies in building their own deacidification plants in Poland. Finally, the decision was to buy two technologies: water deacidification technology from the company Neschen, Bückeburg process, and bookkeeper from preservation technologies. Paper Clinic, the first mass deacidification center for Polish written heritage at the Jagiellonian Library in Kraków, carried out first tests of Neschen process, and in 2005 opened bookkeeper installations. The second library, National Library in Warsaw, purchased two technologies as well, Neschen, and in 2007, Preservation Technologies Bookkeeper, and both installations are still working at this institution. At present, National Library is at the end of the deacidification of its archival library collections and special collection of 19th century books, now focusing specifically still on periodicals and social life documents. Of course, all these documents mainly are now restored in both installations. It depends of the condition of documents. Focus on social life, journals and newspapers, cartography and musical prints is of course natural choice. These materials sometimes were meant to disappear with the time. Specifically, social life documents never were produced on the good quality papers, similar as newspapers. They need saving as soon as possible. Paper Clinic at Jagiellonian Library focuses on collections of books from 19th and 20th century, published till 1994. Unfortunately, present funding of these two centers are a little bit of different level. So after end of the governmental program, processes work of Jagiellonian Library slowed down importantly. It is a major problem of financing bookkeeper installation due to the high prices of chemicals related to the deacidification in this process. Of course, both plants have recuperation, recycling of the media, but still some part of the chemicals have to be purchased every year. National Library have better funding addressed to the National Library holdings and concentrates mainly on the archival copies. Additionally, needs to be said that both paper cleaning and plant at the National Library work also for other libraries, museums, and archives, and they acidify also material from other institutions. Also, archives are using this opportunity to send for the acidification in non-water technology some of our documents. Acid paper in the archives was, in my opinion, much difficult choices. First of all, choice of technology, localization of laboratories, and selection of material for the acidification. Already during governmental program, it was clear that majority of acid documents are not yet in the state archives. Majority is still being transferred from the our supervised archives from different governmental and other public bodies archives. So we deal with a kind of the iceberg of the acid paper in the archives. On the other hand, also the archive needed over the law of public access give to hand of reader every document. The material in the libraries were a little bit in the better condition because libraries focused on the archival volume, archival copy. Our documents were used over many years and are in the very bad condition and state of preservation. Also, libraries can always find a better copy for digitization and deacidification, because the same copy of one book may, of course, not always be present in different library collections. The archive copies are always in use, always unique, and of course, we have to deal with 33 state archives collections. By now, it's more than 360 running kilometers of shelves, out of which majority are the documents produced in the second half of 19th century and 20th century. So selection of the documents and selection of priorities is for archival collections extremely difficult. Needless to say, the acid paper is not the only problem. Over the damage of acid degradation, often we have to deal and acknowledge presence of the ink corrosion, or at least iron inks present in our documents. We started with a big program of evaluation of conditions of archival materials with, of course, statistic review on condition based on the examination of more than 1,000 archival units selected from 3 different state archives. Here on the slide, you have all examination and base for assessment of the condition of our documents. What we learned that in the fairly good condition, we have almost half of our holdings, but the glass is half empty, half full. To the group 2 and 3 belong another half of the holding, and 1/4 of our collections actually are already in the condition that doesn't that prevents or should prevent us from giving this archival documents to hand of users. That, of course, was not really possible. Why not bookkeeper? Bookkeeper technology needed documents in the fairly good condition because of the high density of the acidification basic liquid. And as already stated, our archival documents are in generally much worse condition of and state of preservation. This technology requires also very normalized sizes of documents, which is also in Polish state archives not really possible. So taking into consideration all these technical problems, archives decided to buy, instead of one installation of bookkeeper, 3 machines for 3,900 bookable water the acidification method. This also was related to the dispersed holdings over all Polish territory, and we could organize one laboratory in the north, one in the south, and 2 mass deacidification plants in the center of the Poland territory. The marking on the slide show you how the plants cooperate with other institutions in Poland. We wanted to have different laboratories not too far from other state archives to minimize costs of transport of archival material to mass deacidification laboratories. 4 centers has been organized between 2006 and 2008. And I have to say these were big investments because, of course, we had to find premises affiliated to the already existing state archives, and we had to renovate basically 4 buildings in order to set laboratories. From the very beginning, it was clear we have to have process quality control, and this system is functioning currently. pH examination of the acidification liquid, pH examination of selected documents before and after treatment, examination of alkaline reserve of the liquid, and examination of alkaline reserve of the test papers, plus microbiological control of liquid in barrels and during process in the machine. We considered that water process can carry some threats of microbiological contamination and development. Since 2016, all these quality control processes are carried out according to technical standard 18344. We participated in the group of ISO responsible for drafting this technical standard, especially to advocate for relating the rules of quality control not only to the non-water technologies, batch processes, but also we advocated for including water process, continuous process in C900 machines and other Bückeburg process machine into this standard. By the end of the program, we have in Poland 30 technicians in 4 laboratories, 4 restorers with higher specialized education in conservation restoration as supervisors, some additional archivists for preparing material, and microbiologists for examination. But the program ended. And here we had the first lesson learned. Of course, when program ends also personal funding. And unfortunately, also due to the personal employment regulation in the public administration, suddenly our employment in the 4 laboratories dropped, and instead of 2 shift activities, we had to go for normal standard 1 shift activities. Lesson 2. We had to learn completely different approach to conservation. Usually in conservation laboratories, we focus on individual archival documents and units. And of course, we practice individualist approach to the treatment program. Mass conservation, mass deacidification is completely different approach. We have to think and plan treatment for complete archival units and entire collections. Systemic approach is also required. It has to include conservation, preservation, digitization in the best, and proper storage. We had to set one unique process for all 4 mass deacidification and conservation laboratories to make sure that all 4 installation and group of workers practice exactly the same technology and exactly the same way of addressing conservation problems. And here I put in red some of the addition of Polish experience into the commonly developed by the owner of process C900 in Germany. It turned out that our material is much more damaged in general as a majority of paper document holdings in other West European countries. And that we sometimes have to approach this problem with more traditional ways. Mass deacidification turned out to be not enough if we were thinking about digitization. Digitization requires at least preparing document to give 100% of preserved information visible on the scan. But again, our documents were too damaged sometimes to be not treated before digitizations. So we attempted to connect treatment before digitization with mass deacidification program. Sometimes it's necessary also to include manual treatment in the bookkeeper or 3900 deacidification chemicals due to the mechanical damage of the paper documents. And sometimes, specifically for the most important objects, we have also to use traditional repairs with Japanese papers and reversible glues, because we have also 19th century acid paper documents on the list of UNESCO Heritage of the World. They deserve not only the acidification, they deserve more individual treatment. Mass deacidification, of course, is limited, and our restoration conservation labs with mass deacidification technologies had to include specialized restorers into the teams, not only as supervisors, but also as additional specialists to tackle more complicated, more damaged documents. And lesson 4, we had to learn close cooperation and coordination between different groups of archives professionals. Individual conservation is a little bit detached from the whole archival system. We work mainly for exhibitions, loans, and treat the most important unique objects. Here we had to set a system and workflow between 3 groups of archival workers and different teams. And of course, from microfilming to digitization, the program helped us a lot. At the beginning, it was adding some equipment for the microfilming laboratories, but by the end of the program, it was mainly investment into the scanners for our new digitization centers. Of course, the questions are still here. What we deacidify, what goes first? Should we scan only, or should we scan and deacidify? And again, this discussion is continuous. During years after the end of the program, approaches in the Polish State Archives differed from and were addressed in a different way during different periods of time. We had a time with total focus on digitization, of course, because still for us in our general strategy, giving access to information is one of the major important focuses. Of course, we know that according to the research, we should focus on the material which is in the better condition. But as I mentioned, documents which are more damaged are still used in our reading rooms, and they are constantly being damaged because of their brittleness by users, by everyday accessibility. So in fact, our archives had also to work in 2 directions. One part to assure that part of the good condition documents will be accepted for mass deacidification, but on the other hand, we could not completely abandon documents in the bad condition. They needed to be treated as soon as possible in order to be still accessible for users and in order to be admissible for digitization. And it works very well because documents after mass conservation, this is the term we use now for our laboratories, are very simple, and basically after digitization they go to the boxes and hopefully they will be never tackled again by hands and be accessible in the original in the reading rooms. The last slide. I will not comment on that. Basically, there are good experiences and bad experiences. New competencies are really important, but we still need more and more specialists being able to work in these technologies. One big problem is dealing with unique technologies and service problems for technologies which are not always available, and the market is very unstable for the services and technical support for our technologies. Thank you very much.